My name is Clara. I'm 29 years old, and on my wedding day, my new mother-in-law pulled me aside, handed me a cheap cleaning apron and a budget spreadsheet, and told me to learn my place. She had no idea the woman she was treating like a gold-digging maid had just sold her tech startup for $20 million. And thank God I kept that secret, because it was the only thing that would save me. The reception was beautiful, or at least it was supposed to be. We were in a moderately priced but elegant venue that my husband, Mark, and I had chosen together. Or rather, that I had paid for, telling him it was a bonus from my modest but successful job as a project manager. His parents, Margaret and David, had made it abundantly clear they wouldn't be contributing a dime. They saw me as a step down, a girl with no family name, no inherited wealth, who had somehow managed to ensnare their precious son. The air was thick with their disapproval, a scent more pungent than the lilies on the tables. I was standing near the cake, talking to one of Mark's cousins, when Margaret glided over. She had a smile on her face that never reached her cold, calculating eyes. "Clara, dear, could I borrow you for a moment? Just a little family business." She steered me by the elbow into a small, empty office off the main hall, closing the door behind us. The music from the party became a dull thud. My beautiful white dress felt like a costume under her scrutinizing gaze. "Now," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The party is lovely. A bit extravagant for your means, I'm sure, but we'll work on that." She reached into her oversized designer handbag and pulled out 2 items. The first was a crisp, folded spreadsheet. The second was a polyester apron, a hideous floral thing that looked like it cost $3. She placed them both on the desk. "This," she said, tapping the spreadsheet, "is a detailed household budget. Mark is a good man, but he's not a bank. This outlines your monthly allowance for groceries, cleaning supplies, and your personal incidentals. You'll submit receipts to me at the end of each month." I just stared at the paper, at the tiny cells dictating how much I was allowed to spend on toothpaste and bread. An allowance. Like a child. I felt a hot flush of anger creep up my neck, but I kept my face a perfect, placid mask. I had spent the last 5 years working 18-hour days, sleeping on a couch in my office, surviving on caffeine and sheer will to build my company from a single line of code into an industry-disrupting force. 2 weeks before this wedding, I had sat in a glass-walled boardroom and signed a document that transferred ownership of my life's work for a sum with 8 zeros. And here was this woman, lecturing me about being frugal with what she assumed was her son's hard-earned and frankly average salary. "And this," she continued, picking up the apron with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated, "is a reminder of a wife's duties. Our home is always immaculate. Mark is used to a certain standard, and I expect you to maintain it. A clean house is the sign of a respectful wife." She held it out to me. The message was unmistakable. You are not a partner. You are the help. I looked past her, through the small window in the door. I could see Mark laughing with his friends, oblivious. I had tried to tell him about the sale. The night before the wedding, I'd sat him down, my heart pounding, ready to share my incredible news, to tell him we were set for life. But he'd cut me off, panicked. He told me his parents were already worried I was too independent and ambitious, and that revealing any major financial success would just make them hate me more. "Just let them think you're relying on me for a while, babe," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "It'll make things smoother. Let them feel in control." Smoother. I looked from my weak-willed new husband back to my tyrannical new mother-in-law, who was still holding out that god-awful apron. She thought she was establishing the rules of my new life. She thought she was putting me in a cage. Have you ever been so completely misjudged by someone who was supposed to welcome you into their family? Let me know your story in the comments. Knowing you're not alone makes a world of difference. And please subscribe so you don't miss seeing how this all plays out. I took the apron. I took the spreadsheet. I even managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, my voice steady. "This is very thoughtful. I understand completely." In that moment, watching the smug satisfaction spread across her face, I made a decision. Mark was wrong. This wasn't about making things smoother. This was a declaration of war. And they had no idea I was coming to the battle with an arsenal they couldn't possibly imagine. She thought she was giving me my uniform as a servant. She had no idea she had just handed me the blueprint for her entire family's downfall. The first 6 months of my marriage were a masterclass in psychological warfare, and I was the sole student, soldier, and battlefield. We didn't have a honeymoon. Mark suggested a weekend camping trip to save money, a suggestion I knew came directly from a phone call with his mother. I agreed, of course. I slept in a tent on the cold ground, my bank account silently accumulating more interest in 2 days than Mark earned in a month, and I listened to him talk about how grounded and realistic it was to start our lives this way. I just smiled and nodded, the smoke from the campfire stinging my eyes. We moved into a charming 2-story house in a quiet, respectable suburb. My house, purchased outright with a fraction of the initial payout from my company's sale. To Mark and his family, it was a miracle that we'd been approved for such a large mortgage on Mark's salary alone. I had fabricated an elaborate story about a small inheritance from a distant great-aunt, just enough for a down payment. It was a story they accepted because it was plausible for a girl like me, a lucky break, rather than a sign of actual competence. Margaret, of course, had to inspect the house before we even moved the first box in. She ran her finger along a windowsill, declared the fixtures builder-grade trash, and handed me a list of approved cleaning products. Life settled into a grim routine dictated by Margaret's spreadsheet. At the end of every month, I would drive to her oversized, ostentatious house for the budget review. I would sit in her sterile white kitchen, a place devoid of any warmth or personality, and lay out my meticulously organized receipts on her granite island. She would scrutinize every single one. "Clara, this coffee brand is $1.50 more than the store brand. Are we being frivolous?" she'd ask, her pen hovering over the line item like an executioner's axe. I'd murmur an apology, explaining the store brand was sold out. One time she held up a receipt for a new pair of running shoes. "An unnecessary expense," she declared. "You can get more exercise cleaning the house properly." I remember just looking at her, this woman in a silk blouse and diamond earrings, critiquing my $70 purchase while my financial advisor was emailing me about a potential 7-figure investment in a renewable energy fund. The sheer absurdity of it was the only thing that kept me from screaming. Mark was no help. He was a ghost in our own home. When I'd try to talk to him about his mother's suffocating control, he would get a pained look on his face. "She's just trying to help, Clara," he'd say. "She's worried about us. She just wants to see us build a stable future. Just play along. It's easier." Easier for whom, I wanted to ask. It was easier for him. He got to avoid confrontation, to maintain his status as the perfect son, while I was being systematically dismantled, my identity erased and replaced with the role of a thrifty, subservient housewife. His father, David, was quieter, but just as insidious. At their mandatory Sunday dinners, he would pat me on the head and ask if I was keeping busy or if I had any little hobbies to fill my time now that I was a married woman. He'd talk about Mark's career with such booming pride while looking at me with a pitying expression that said, "Well, at least you're pretty." The worst incident came during Thanksgiving. It was our turn to host. I spent 2 days cooking, using Margaret's approved budget, trying to make everything perfect. I wanted to prove, maybe just to myself, that I could win this unwinnable game. They arrived and walked through the house like building inspectors. Margaret pointed out a tiny smudge on the guest bathroom mirror. David commented that the turkey was a bit dry. During dinner, the conversation turned to Mark's younger sister, Chloe, who had just been accepted into a prestigious MBA program. "We are so proud," Margaret gushed, beaming at her daughter. "She has so much drive, so much ambition. She's going to run a company one day." Then she turned her gaze to me, a sickeningly sweet smile on her face. "It's so wonderful that some women are built for that world. And it's just as wonderful that other women," she said, her eyes sweeping over me, "find their fulfillment in supporting their husbands and creating a warm home." The insult was so perfectly delivered, wrapped in a compliment so everyone at the table could nod in agreement. I looked at Mark, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, to defend me, to point out that I had a degree, that I had a career before I married him. He just took a large bite of stuffing and looked down at his plate. In that moment, The last vestiges of the man I thought I had married crumbled away. I saw him for what he was, a coward, a willing accomplice in my own humiliation. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. They thought they were boxing me in, solidifying my place at the bottom of their family hierarchy. They didn't realize they were just giving me more and more reasons to burn their world to the ground. The turning point wasn't a single dramatic explosion. It was a slow, creeping realization that culminated in a quiet, devastating discovery. It happened about 8 months into the marriage, on a Tuesday. I was cleaning the house, wearing that hideous floral apron over my clothes, feeling like an actor in a particularly depressing play. Mark was at work. His parents were, thankfully, busy with whatever it is wealthy, retired bullies do on a weekday. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the hum of the vacuum cleaner. I was cleaning Mark's home office, a small room he rarely used but insisted on having. I was dusting his bookshelf, a collection of unread business hardbacks and college textbooks, when I knocked over a framed photo of him and his parents. The glass didn't break, but the back of the frame popped open. As I went to fix it, a folded piece of paper fluttered out. It was old, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. My first thought was that it was some sentimental note, but the letterhead at the top stopped me cold. It was from Henderson and Associates, a very well-known and very expensive financial advisory firm. My heart started to pound a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. Henderson and Associates was a name I knew well. They had been one of the firms that had tried to court my company for the acquisition. They were sharks, the best in the business. What on earth was Mark doing with a letter from them? I unfolded the paper. It was a summary of his family's investment portfolio. And it was a bloodbath. I sank into Mark's desk chair, the vacuum cleaner still humming in the hallway, forgotten. I read through the document, my mind, which was so used to analyzing data and financial projections, quickly piecing together the story. Bad investments, high-risk ventures that hadn't paid off, a catastrophic loss in a biotech startup. Their entire lifestyle, the lavish house, the designer clothes, the country club membership, was a facade. According to this statement, which was dated only a few months before our wedding, David and Margaret were leveraged to the hilt. They were hemorrhaging money, and their net worth was a fraction of what they projected to the world. They weren't just well-off people who had hit a rough patch. They were on the verge of total financial collapse. Suddenly, everything clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Their obsession with my spending, the budget spreadsheet, the insistence we live frugally, the pressure on Mark to have a stable future. It wasn't about controlling me because they were arrogant traditionalists. It was about controlling me because they were desperate. They saw Mark's salary not as a foundation for our life, but as a lifeline for theirs. And I wasn't just a disappointing daughter-in-law. I was a financial liability, a drain on the limited resources they were trying to siphon from their son. And then came the final, gut-wrenching blow. Tucked behind the first page was a second, a more recent email printout between Mark and his father. The subject line was, "The Clara Plan." My blood ran cold. I read the exchange, my breath catching in my throat. David was instructing Mark on how to manage me. "We need to keep her expectations low," he'd written. "No lavish trips, no designer bags. Every penny she thinks you're saving is a penny that can be diverted to us to handle the mess. We need to get her fully dependent, make her think this is all you can afford. It's the only way to keep things afloat until Chloe finishes her MBA and can land a job that will really help." And Mark's reply? "I know, Dad. I'm handling it. She's falling for it. She wants to please me. It won't be a problem. It won't be a problem." The words echoed in the silent room. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to grip the desk to steady myself. This wasn't just weakness or cowardice on Mark's part. This was an active, calculated deception. He hadn't asked me to keep my success a secret, to protect my feelings or smooth things over. He'd done it to use me, to make me a willing participant in my own financial and emotional starvation, all to prop up his parents' failing empire. My love for him, my willingness to compromise, my desire for a family, they had twisted all of it into a weapon to be used against me. They saw me as a fool, a pawn. I sat there for a long time, the papers shaking in my hand. The rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for months finally boiled over, but it was a cold, clear rage. It burned away all the hurt, all the confusion, all the desperate hope that things might get better. I looked at the floral apron still tied around my waist. I untied it, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it into the trash can. The role of the subservient wife was over. The performance was canceled. They thought they had a plan. They had no idea I was about to write a new script, one where I wasn't the victim. I was the one in charge, and the first scene would be ensuring that every single one of their lies would come crashing down around them. After that day, I became the best actress you have ever seen. On the outside, I was still the same Clara. I was docile, agreeable, and perfectly followed Margaret's budget. I dutifully submitted my grocery receipts and nodded when she criticized my choice of laundry detergent. I smiled sweetly at David when he patted my hand at Sunday dinner and asked about my little life. I even continued to play the part of the loving, supportive wife to Mark, listening to his complaints about work and rubbing his shoulders, all while a storm of calculated fury was brewing inside me. The Clara they saw was a fiction. The real Clara, the one who had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing, was now working in the shadows, orchestrating their demise. My first call was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn who had handled the sale of my company. I explained the situation, omitting the emotional details and focusing on the financial deception. They committed fraud, she said, her voice crisp and clear over the phone. Marrying you under false pretenses with the explicit, documented intent to manipulate your shared finances for their own gain is fraudulent inducement. We can dissolve this marriage like it never happened. My second call was to a forensic accountant, a man named Arthur, who was semi-retired and loved a good puzzle. I hired him with a single wire transfer from my personal accounts, an amount that would have made Margaret faint. His job was simple: dig into every corner of David and Margaret's finances. I wanted to know every bad investment, every shell corporation, every desperate loan. I wanted a complete and undeniable picture of their financial ruin. I had the Henderson and Associates letter as a starting point. It was like giving a bloodhound the scent. While Arthur worked his magic, I began my own preparations. I stopped using my joint account with Mark for anything. Every expense, from a cup of coffee to the gas in my car, went on a new credit card under my name only, paid off from my personal wealth. I meticulously documented every instance of their manipulation. The budget spreadsheets, the condescending comments, Mark's dismissals. I wrote it all down in a password-protected file, complete with dates and times. I was building a case, not just a legal one, but a moral one. The most satisfying part of my silent preparation was what I did with my house. My beautiful house that they all thought was a lucky break. I had Evelyn draw up post-nuptial paperwork. It was a simple document stating that in the event of a divorce, the house, which was solely in my name, a detail Mark had conveniently overlooked in his haste to get us moved in, would remain my sole property. One evening, I sat Mark down on the couch. I presented the document to him, my expression one of worried sincerity. "Mark, honey," I began, my voice trembling slightly for effect. "I was thinking, with your parents so worried about our finances, maybe we should do this to protect you." I let that sink in. If anything ever happened to us, I wouldn't want your parents to think I was trying to take anything from you. This just makes it clear that the house is mine, from my inheritance. So there would be no confusion. It would put their minds at ease. The look on his face was a mixture of confusion and relief. He saw it exactly as I wanted him to, as an act of submission. Me, the simple girl, trying to appease his powerful family. He didn't even read the fine print. He just saw a way to score points with his parents. "Wow, Clara, that's really thoughtful of you," he said, signing it without a moment's hesitation. "I'll tell them. They'll be so impressed." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. He wasn't just my husband. He was now my tenant, and he didn't even know it. The final piece fell into place a week before my planned confrontation. Arthur, the forensic accountant, called me. "I've got it," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "It's worse than we thought, but there's more. The biotech company they lost a fortune on, the one that crashed and burned, I found out who the majority investor was before it went public. He paused for dramatic effect. It was David's brother, your husband's uncle. They convinced their entire country club to invest. It wasn't just a bad investment. It was a family scheme that blew up in their faces. They didn't just lose their money. They lost everyone else's money, too. They're not just broke. They're pariahs. That was it. That was the kill shot. They weren't just liars and manipulators. They were frauds who had ruined the lives of their friends. Their reputation was the only thing they had left, and I was about to shatter it into a million pieces. I had the legal paperwork, the financial evidence, and the secret that would socially obliterate them. The stage was set. The perfect occasion was just around the corner. David and Margaret's 35th wedding anniversary party, a lavish affair they were throwing at their country club, on credit, I now knew, to keep up appearances. It was going to be their grandest performance, and also their last. The anniversary party was exactly as pretentious as I'd imagined. Held in the main ballroom of their country club, the room was dripping with crystal chandeliers and ostentatious floral arrangements. 200 of their closest friends, or, as I now knew, their victims, were mingling, sipping champagne, and air-kissing. Margaret was in her element, wearing a shimmering gold dress, her laughter echoing unnaturally loud. David stood beside her, beaming, a king presiding over a court he could no longer afford. For my grand entrance, I had chosen my outfit with surgical precision. It was a simple, elegant, black dress. Understated, but it was a designer piece that cost more than Mark's monthly salary. It was the kind of dress that whispered wealth, it didn't scream it. Mark, oblivious, just told me I looked nice. The speeches began after dinner. Chloe went first, gushing about her wonderful, successful parents. Then Mark got up. He talked about their legacy of hard work and integrity. The irony was so thick, I could have choked on it. Finally, David took the microphone to thank everyone. To my beautiful wife, Margaret, he toasted, raising his glass, and to our wonderful family, who understand the value of a solid foundation. This was my cue. As the applause died down, I stood up, a small, polite smile on my face. I hope you don't mind, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. As their new daughter-in-law, I'd love to say a few words and present a special anniversary gift. Margaret beamed, seeing this as another act of public deference. She even gestured for me to come forward. Mark looked proud. They had no idea they were inviting the wolf onto the stage. I walked to the microphone, clutching a beautiful leather-bound portfolio. David, Margaret, I began, my voice clear and steady. I have been so inspired by your commitment, not just to each other, but to your family's financial security. So inspired, in fact, that I decided to do a little financial planning of my own. I opened the portfolio. Inside, I had copies of everything. I wanted to give you a gift that truly reflects your values. So my gift to you is a comprehensive financial audit. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. David's smile tightened. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Clara, dear, this isn't the time or place, she hissed, just loud enough for the front tables to hear. Oh, I think it's the perfect place, I said, my voice turning from sweet to steel. Since so many of your investors are here tonight. I held up the first document, a copy of the Henderson & Associates letter. For instance, I'm sure everyone would be interested to know that according to this statement from just before my wedding, your net worth was already deeply in the negative. You've been insolvent for years. Gasps erupted around the room. David turned ghostly white. I didn't stop. I was a machine. And I was especially moved by the Clara plan, I continued, my eyes locking with Mark's. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The secret plan you and your son devised to keep me dependent and managed so you could siphon off his salary to cover your catastrophic losses. The plan to make me think my husband was a provider, when in reality, he was just your collection agent. I saw Chloe's jaw drop. Friends were turning to stare at them, their expressions shifting from celebration to suspicion. But the real masterpiece of your financial genius, I said, saving the best for last, was the Biogen Futures investment. I looked out at the crowd. I see a lot of familiar faces here from the country club. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Gable. I have to ask, How did you all feel when David and his brother convinced you to pour your retirement savings into a company that went bankrupt 6 months later? A company you were never told was on the brink of collapse. The room was in uproar. People were on their feet, shouting questions, pointing fingers. The party was over. The trial had begun. Margaret finally found her voice. You lying, gold-digging little witch! How dare you!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into pure rage. "Gold-digging?" I laughed, a real, genuine laugh, and it felt incredible. "Margaret, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Clara Jensen, or it was. I am the founder and former CEO of Synapse Dynamics, the tech firm that was acquired 9 months ago by Oracle for $20 million. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. I let the information hang there for a moment, watching it land. The house you critique is mine. The allowance you gave me wouldn't cover the taxes on my investment portfolio. You see, you weren't trying to control a poor, simple girl. You were trying to cage a dragon, and you just showed her exactly where to aim her fire." I turned to Mark. His face was a mask of pure horror and disbelief. "And as for you," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm, "my lawyer has already filed for an annulment on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. The post-nup you so thoughtfully signed ensures you get nothing. You have 24 hours to pack your things and get out of my house." I placed the portfolio on the lectern. "For everyone else, this contains all the evidence of their fraud. I suggest you talk to your lawyers. Happy anniversary." And with that, I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the smoldering ruins of their lives behind me. The sound of their world collapsing was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Walking out of that country club was like walking out of a prison and into the clean night air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic, exactly as I had planned. My lawyer, Evelyn, later told me it was a scene of chaos. The portfolio I left behind was descended upon like vultures on a carcass. The life David and Margaret had built on lies and other people's money evaporated in a single evening. If you enjoyed watching them get what they deserved, please hit the like button. It really helps our stories reach more people who need to see justice served. The next day, as promised, I had the locks on my house changed. Mark showed up in the afternoon, his face pale and haggard. He tried to plead with me through the door, his voice cracking. He said he loved me, that he was just trying to protect his family, that he didn't know the full extent of their problems. It was all a pathetic, transparent lie. I didn't even bother to answer. I just sat in my living room, sipping tea, until he finally gave up and left. His things were already packed in boxes on the front porch. The annulment went through without a hitch. They didn't dare fight it. The evidence of fraud was too overwhelming. The marriage was legally erased, as if it never existed. For me, it was emotionally erased the moment I read the Clara plan. The consequences for his family were swift and brutal. Within a week, they were facing a class action lawsuit from 24 of their friends from the country club. Their assets were frozen. They had to sell their house, the one Margaret kept so immaculately, to cover a fraction of their legal fees and debts. They went from being the toast of their social circle to being reviled pariahs overnight. Chloe, the golden child with the ambitious MBA, found her reputation tarnished by her family's scandal. I heard through the grapevine that a few job offers she'd been counting on were mysteriously rescinded. It turns out no reputable firm wants to hire someone whose family name is synonymous with fraud. I didn't have to lift another finger. I had simply held up a mirror, and their own grotesque reflection had destroyed them. Freedom felt quiet. For the first time in almost a year, I could wake up in my own home without a feeling of dread. I could buy whatever brand of coffee I wanted without someone scrutinizing the receipt. I redecorated the entire house, purging every last trace of their influence. I replaced their bland, traditional taste with bright colors, modern art, and furniture that was comfortable, not just for show. I turned Mark's old, unused office into my own personal library and workspace, a sanctuary of my own making. The money, which had been this huge, secret burden, now felt like what it truly was, a tool for my freedom. It wasn't just wealth, it was independence. It was the power to protect myself, to enforce boundaries, to walk away from a toxic situation without a moment's hesitation. They had tried to make me small, to fit me into a tiny pre-approved box. But I had never belonged in that box. The irony is, by trying to control me, they handed me the very motivation I needed to reclaim my life in the most spectacular way possible. I had sold one company and in the process had inadvertently executed the most successful, hostile takeover of my own life. I was finally free, not just from them, but from the person I had allowed myself to become in their presence. I was no longer Clara, the wife. I was just Clara, and that was more than enough. It's been a year since the anniversary party, a year of profound, cleansing silence. Sometimes I sit in my library, the one that used to be his office, and I look out at the garden. I don't think about them much anymore. They've become a ghost story, a cautionary tale. The last I heard, David and Margaret were living in a small rented condo 2 states away, their names mud in the community they worked so hard to impress. Mark, I believe, is living with them. The great provider, back in his childhood bedroom. What I do think about is the nature of value. They measured a person's worth by their last name, their address, and the label on their clothes. They saw me as worthless because I didn't fit their shallow criteria. They were so blinded by their own desperate performance of wealth that they couldn't see the real thing standing right in front of them. The truth is, the $20 million was never my real power. It was just a tool. My real power, the thing that I built my company with, and the thing that saved my life, was my resilience. It was my intellect. It was my refusal to believe I was as small as they wanted me to be. The saddest part of this whole affair was Mark. I did love him, or at least, I loved the man I thought he was. But the man I loved would have defended me. He would have been proud of me. He wouldn't have seen my success as a threat to his parents' fragile egos. The man I married was a stranger, a hollow man propping up a hollow legacy. Losing him was painful, but living a lie would have been a slow death. In the end, I'm grateful. Grateful for their greed, for their arrogance, for their underestimation. They forced me to see my own strength in its purest form. I'm not just a survivor of their toxic game. I'm the architect of my own life. I've started a new venture now, a foundation that provides seed funding and mentorship for women starting their own businesses in the tech world. I want to give other women the one thing I almost lost, the belief that their ambition is a virtue, not a flaw. This whole experience taught me that your true value is something no one can give you and no one can take away. It's forged in your failures and proven by your comebacks. Have you ever had a moment where you had to prove your own worth against someone's expectations? Share your story in the comments. Your victory, big or small, can be the spark of hope someone else needs to see today. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you want more tales of triumph and getting the justice you deserve, make sure you subscribe to the channel. My name is Clara, and I'm just getting started.